All right, so uh, people worked really hard over the last couple weeks to make sure that I wouldn't be able to bring this information forward via YouTube. Um, People went so far as to get me into a car accident so that I wouldn't be able to explain any of this. Um, and people have done a great deal more than that for a very long time to ensure that I wouldn't be able to tell you any of this. This is something that I really took my time sitting down to write out. I really wanted to sit down and actually kind of enjoy making this video, but I'm just not going to be able to do that. Um, I have to just get the video and the information out basically as quickly as I can um, before something else could happen. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but I'm going to have to get the information out. And it's unfortunately not that fun to me to explain anything to you guys just out of sheer, like, necessity, life and death situations. It would have been nice to actually, explain these things to you with a somewhat, happy-ish state of being, but it's just not gonna happen. All right, so I'm pretty sure that I was born in Amarillo, Texas. I'm not sure, but that's what my birth certificate says. That's where I grew up as a kid and stuff. Um, I thought that my dad was Donald Cross. I thought that my mother was a Melinda Logston, who was also at one point a Melinda Cross. She told me when I was young that I wasn't allowed to say that because she had warrants in Tennessee or something like that. So she just went by her maiden name instead. All right, so my parents allegedly met in church. And I realize that these might not be my parents, but I'm giving you guys the information from the perspective that I've had up until, all right. So, my parents met in church. Her family was involved in the Freemasons and Eastern Stars. He was kind of a video game dork who was going into the army. He had red hair and freckles and those little, like, crazy Coke bottle style glasses that they used to have back in the day. I believe my mom, they always told me that she gave birth to me when she was 17 or something like that. She said that when she was pregnant with me that she ate a lot of pizza and that the smell of Parmesan made her really sick. And for like the first half or more of my life, I couldn't stand the smell of Parmesan, but I couldn't stop eating pizza. So that's kind of a weird thing. Even if that's not my mom, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know anymore. Okay, Amarillo is divided up between Potter and Randall County. I was born in Randall County, which is considered the better side of Amarillo. I would say that none of the hospitals in Amarillo are nice, but if you're going to be born in Amarillo, you would probably choose the slightly higher end hospital in the slightly nicer side of town. I believe I was born in the middle of a midsummer night, rendering me a lunar Gemini Cancer cusper, but if that's not really my birthday, then none of that's true. Okay, it's been years since all of my photographs were stolen, so I can't look back at them or reflect or show you any of these photographs to go along with anything, sorry. There was a woman in those photographs who I was never able to recognize. No one would tell me who she was, and she was holding a baby, and I didn't know if it was my brother or I. And she was holding the baby directly after having them in the hospital. I still don't know who she was. On my birth certificate, it shows that my parents were custodians in a movie theater, and I used to imagine my parents getting it on in the dollar theaters as they cleaned in the middle of the night, and I considered that that was how I was conceived. My dad said that he met my mother in church. He would say something later on like, "Oh, I met your mom in church, so I thought that she would be a good person, but she really wasn't," or something. There was a house situated a little bit across, catty cornered from my grandparents' house on Ward Road in Amarillo, Texas. That used to be the house where my young parents stayed when I was a baby. There was green carpet on the floor, and I can remember crawling on that carpet. There were photos of what I think was me taking my first steps on the carpet there, but a lot of the photos that were supposed to be of me or are of me or were of me are me in a blue, are I'm like wearing blue. So for whatever reason, people didn't want anybody, I don't know if they just did that because that was what they had, or if they wanted people to think that I was a boy. I'm not sure what was going on there. I know that was kind of out there, but um, one of my clearest and most cherished personal memories about being a baby was the fact that I was able to fly. I was a flying baby. I was able to leave my body and be above my body for the majority of the time. I didn't perceive the world from within my body. I perceived the world, especially as a baby, from above my body. Um, I'm not sure if other people can remember leaving their bodies as babies, but I would fly around all over. I would be in people's heads. I would be delivering information from one person to another. Like, I was doing some weird stuff as a baby, and I don't know whether or not other people have a recollection of being like that. I don't know. I traveled quite a bit. I would say that I spent more time watching my life from above than I spent watching it from within my own body. I just said that. Sorry. Okay. Not sorry. I loved my parents very much, and I was able to assess that they struggled quite a bit and that they were really unhappy, and my parents weren't able to conceal very much from me because I could see and feel and sense what was happening everywhere. I felt my parents began to notice I was different, and they were frustrated by that. My psychological and spiritual my psychological and spiritual to my parents and the world around me. I wrote that wrong. I mean, I know that all babies are attached to their parents and loving to their parents, but I felt like I was like overly loving to my parents or whatever. Neither of my parents had a calm demeanor about being married or being parents. They carried a very disappointed, even kind of desperate air about them. They were both incredibly unhappy, and they always seemed to be focused on money. I remember trying to psychically imply to my parents that I would be able to do or find out all manner of information. I suggested that they could send me anywhere to accomplish anything. I was able to project thoughts, which meant that I could make suggestions in someone's mind, and I could put my own energy into it, my own like refreshing energy, and make them think that it was their own thought. I could simultaneously lend them my excitement over any matter. I could mentally sway anyone to prefer my parents over anyone else in a crowd. The possibilities were endless, and I was born with this very helpful nature. And it was really weird. I was like, that's like really some of my most vivid memories that I have of being a baby, even though it sounds totally nuts. Okay. When I spoke to my parents in their minds, they acted like they were very bothered by that, and they had this mindset like what was going on in their lives and in their minds wasn't any of my business or something. Even if I was laying in a crib, okay, I was between 3 and 6 months of age, and my mother was pushing me in a black carriage. She pushed me to a Catholic convent over a stone path where she would ask nuns if they would take me, and the nuns, she told them there was something wrong with the baby. and they thought she was strange, and they asked her specifically what was wrong with the baby, and regardless of her response, they refused me as an infant. My mother was actually so upset about it that she marched away from the scene, leaving me in the baby carriage with the nuns for a moment. And then I let out a blood-curdling scream. And I remember screaming, "Don't leave me with these wicked women." But of course I didn't scream that. But that's what you know what I mean? That's what I screamed as it came out as a baby screaming in this like terrifying cry or whatever. Now I tried to make this video about a week ago, and people pulled up beside me and started making all kinds of noise. They brought out their air horn and air sirens. They were doing all kinds of stuff to prevent me from making this video. It was insane. My mom came back and got me, of course. The blood-curdling cry stopped my mom dead in her tracks, and she had to come back and get me and, walk away from the nuns and stuff. My mother was depressed and desperate, and my father had a very avoidant mindset. He was a little feminine. I could feel that my mom felt oppressed, trapped, like she'd made the wrong decisions, and she had a lot to hide, and had plots and scams and ideas, and that she was angry and sought attention sometimes. She was very emotional. She was always thinking of her parents and being home. She was homesick, even though she didn't like her parents. She didn't like being married. She didn't like having children. She didn't like being stuck out there in Tennessee. She hated where we lived. I can remember being very hungry when I was little and opening the refrigerator. I pulled out a small roll of biscuits that were in the door. I fought with them until I remembered my mom and I making them together, and I remembered how to open them. And I remember getting the biscuits open and then realizing that they weren't fully cooked, but like pulling the dough out, and I was like so hungry that I was eating the dough out of the biscuits anyways. I remember getting into the fridge and getting in trouble for eating weird stuff out of the fridge before that too. That's a really clear memory, the biscuit memory. That was a really weird one. I remember laying in a crib. I remember being in a mobile home. I remember crawling around on my granny's couch cushions, laughing. There's actual photos of that. I remember sitting in a high chair in an apartment and interacting with the spirit world, which I've already talked about in another video. I'm not going to talk about that again. I mean, I will eventually, probably, but not right now. At some point, the house that we lived in across from my grandparents was lifted up and moved. I couldn't believe they lifted the entire house up like that. I believe they pointed out to me at some point while it was taking place, so that it would be a traumatic moment for me. No one bothered asking me if my babyhood home could be spirited away, leaving behind a shed and an empty lot, and an emptiness that would fill the space where the gray house formerly sat. I have a vague memory of potentially hallucinating while I was in that house. That my mom and her friends may have given me something while they were all partying together, and whatever it was made me think that there were spiders crawling all over me, and I was like, oh my god, there's spiders crawling all over me, and everybody in the room was just laughing at me, and the spiders were so bad that I went and hid in a closet and just hid there, and I can remember seeing spiders crawling all over my body, and apparently they weren't there. So apparently I got a hold of something, or they gave me something. My parents would move with me to a trailer a couple miles away from my grandparents' house, which was on Ward Road in Amarillo, Texas. We would ride through a long row of thick, healthy trees before making it to that small trailer park. I'm sure I would remember which spot was ours, even though I've never visited the location as an adult. It's doubtful that the same trailer still exists, but I would remember the inside of it, and I know I spent some time in a crib in there. And I remember my mom cooking in the kitchen there. My parents may not have gotten along very well. I remember my mom being asleep while I roamed awake all the time, messing around with things in the early mornings. The places I lived were not childproof, so to speak. I'm not sure if that was a thing in the 80s. My mother was always exhausted and frustrated that I was getting into everything. I'm not sure if my mom was experiencing normal sleep issues, had depression problems, was taking medication, or was being drugged, or had an addiction or alcoholism issue. But I remember her sleeping heavily while I was awake, and I would apparently acknowledge myself in these moments and would get into a world of shit. We attended a church by the name of Mescalero Baptist Church outside of Amarillo, potentially from the time I was born until I refused to attend anymore at the age of 11. My grandma Beverly worked in the nursery sometimes. I can remember her abusing toddlers and babies. She would do this underwear humiliation ritual on them, making them take their clothes off until they stood in only their underwear, and then she would go in a long rant about why their undies were dirty or nasty or whatever other pedophile phrases turned her nasty old demonic ass on. She locked the children in a closet, and sometimes a few of them at once. She was in a room in the very back building with a closet, in the very back of the building with a closet. She would strip the kids down, criticize them, make accusations against them, demand they accept punishment, and that they wear better, cleaner underwear to church next Sunday. She would have much time with she wouldn't have much time with the children, but with what time she had, she traumatized and boldly sexually demoralized all of them in the nursery. At that point, anyone who would walk into the nursery, the abusive nursery caretakers would bark or sometimes joke that there was room for extra people to be punished over here in the corner with the small children if they were going to continue to barge in during learning moments. I believe my stepmother may have walked in on my grandmother Beverly abusing toddlers in that nursery, and an old white-haired, loud and aggressive grandma scared her away. All I remember is a slightly overweight, scared brunette kid popping into the room, looking shocked over what she saw. She froze. She may have only been 10 or 12. It would still be another 5 years before she would. Not 5 years. It would still be years before she would hook up with my father, who was nearly a decade older, give or take. So my stepmom walked in while we were all being abused whenever I was little, and she just stood there. I swear this little girl was my stepmom, would later be my stepmom. She walked in on my grandma abusing the little kids in the nursery, little toddlers and stuff. And she said, "There's plenty of room over here for your punishment too if you want." And the little girl was just terrified. You know what I mean? I think that was Denise. And that she walked back out. And that was, I think, the one time that I saw my stepmom while I was a little kid. Okay. I would be locked in that closet much longer than all the other kids. My clothing would be taken, and I would just sit and stand in the closet. I remember sleeping on the floor, waking up to the sunlight blasting through the windows, small streams of light entering the closet doors. My grandma said something to me when she left me in the closet like that, like, "Sit in this closet and something God, sit in this closet and pray to God. If you love God so much, stay in this closet and spend some time with him. Tell God how much you love him in the closet." And I remember the air being really cold, and a different kind of cold. A cold the skin forgets is even cold, until the breath evens out as though the body has adjusted, and the sunlight would hit me in between all the darkness, and it would make my skin look radiant. I would just glow in the dark with just a little bit of sunlight glaring on me, and just cold skin, God, time, and a tight dark space, all alone in a big empty church. I would be left sometimes from Sunday until Sunday. You wouldn't believe how empty a church can be. Sometimes when she would come to get me, I was pretty bad off. I would just fall asleep after a while. I would be dressed up for church, and life would go on like nothing happened. Even stranger affairs took place in the infant nursery, but I'm not going to get into that part. Other than I will say that she was really loud, like instructing people to do things, and it's taken me all this time to realize that she may have actually been making pornography back then while she was in a church nursery. All right. People would call me Madonna, making fun of the name La Donna. And I remembered seeing that one music video Madonna made with those real pointy boobs. And people used to tell me that Madonna was an SLUT. So people would call me Madonna accidentally instead of LaDonna, and I, as a little kid, thought they were calling me an SLUT. Everyone else had normal names, but I had a stupid masculine name that everyone made fun of. People would tell me I was pretty and that my name was pretty, but I know that they were just lying to be nice because it was all so terrible. They weren't telling the pretty girls that they were pretty. They would only tell the ugly girls that they were pretty. One day my mom told my relatives they were coming to visit. One day my mom told me some of my relatives were coming to visit, and apparently it was during a time frame during which they practiced my mom was practicing her reverse psychology tactics on me. So she gave me tactics on what not to do and how not to act, knowing that that was exactly how I would act. She had her relatives, she told me for weeks that they were coming over and that they were going to potentially help her with money and stuff. And so she said, make sure that you don't say anything about your dad, and you don't talk about how much you love your dad and all this other stuff that my dad was doing. So the moment that they walked into the apartment, I began to act out and talk about my dad and act all stupid and stuff and do exactly what she told me not to do, because they had been practicing this. They'd been doing this reverse psychology thing with me, and it was part of their manipulation tactics. Anyways, you might not understand it now, but hopefully it'll all come together. All right. I began to put on an all-out display in front of the audience, who almost seemed to be waiting for me to make a mistake. Almost as though they had shown up to be witnesses somehow behind my back to stuff that I would never have anything to do with. And I would actually meet one of those people later on when I was an adult, and she would make snarkly remarks about what had happened. The moment I did so, they made a big deal of it and left right away. I was never fully introduced to that part of my family, and I'm not sure if I ever saw any of those adults again, but after I became an adult and had my own kids, I would later see that cousin, and she would act like a total redneck, telling me about how they could all tell my dad was abusing me. And then she started telling me about how she did lots of drugs and a bunch of dudes ran a train on her in the shower, and maybe some of them were her cousins. And I realized after all those years of being embarrassed over my behavior as a toddler, the people I'd worry about embarrassing myself over weren't any better than I was, and they were probably part of some weirder conspiracy altogether. While my dad was away, my motherly unit began to spend some time with some random neighbors and a 14-year-old boy with whom she would later have an affair and get busted. The guys who started hanging out were obnoxious, young, and not really the best guys to have around kids. It was all very sudden, and my mom was accepted into a small crowd of people who were loud and boisterous. She also began sneaking out at night and leaving us alone for longer periods of time. My little brother and I then created a designated spot from the chair for when my mom was gone. Sometimes I would wake up, my mother would be gone, and I wouldn't be able to find my baby brother. My world would spin as I panicked. After being alone like that, I would eventually run and hide behind the chair, where I would be surprised to sometimes find my little brother hiding. I realized that he had been through the same panicky process and found the right place to hide. The guys my mom hung out with were mean, and they would kind of torment my little brother and I, chasing us into our bedroom, turning the lights off and on, or telling us they were going to hit us with switches or belts. My baby brother was always mortified. He was always so much more scared than I was. I don't believe he ever went through any process during which parents doted on him or loved him. He was abused from the moment he was born, and he was terrified and terrified or confused as hell looking in every photo that anybody ever took of him. My mom knew the manager of Peters Mill Road in Tennessee, which is an apartment we lived in that used to be an old army barracks. The manager would watch my little brother and I sometimes. They may have been partying with my mom or something, I don't know. She may have been doing a little work for them. They had a daughter who was obsessed with New Kids on the Block. The apartment complex was really ghetto and kind of scary, but in the home of the management, that was like the only fun place to be. They had a fatherly figure who was really aggressive and abusive. He would tell me to eat everything on my plate, and that would end up, that weird eat everything on your plate and that weird fear factor thing would end up contributing to eating disorders that I had later on in life that I had to learn how to get over by myself. And there was a wooden bridge over in that area across from the apartments, and I still remember my dad driving across the wooden bridge. Like, my mom, and my brother, my mom was crying, my brother and I were in the backseat crying. We thought we were all gonna die as my dad drove us across a wooden bridge. That like was like a, like one of those bridges nobody was supposed to be driving over. It was like, that was one of the first times that I thought I was going to die as a kid, and I was really scared. I would wander around the apartment complex alone until I wound up on the rooftop sometimes where there was a group of kids with moms who were nicer to me. I learned where to find the mom who handed out the free popsicles, and that would become a problem later on. And the popsicles were plastic, in these plastic packaging they still use today. The plastic corners would cut into the corners of my mouth, and the popsicle ice would freeze my hands. I would try to wrap the ice with my shirt or anything, but it was never enough, and there was never any way to protect my mouth from getting cut up. My mom taught me how to use a pendulum to divine. She taught me how to answer any questions anyone had, how to count wrist rings, to tell to tell someone how many children they would have, and weird things like that. Suddenly the whole neighborhood was lined up asking me to do readings for them, lined up all the way out the door down the sidewalk, and I was only like 3 or 4 years old. I also began to practice art as a kid. My mom was encouraging about that. She had a cat, I believe she may have sacrificed in front of me, named Merlin. I remember running in the woods away from dogs chasing us when my mom's side piece dude walked us into the woods into getting chased down by dogs. I woke up one night to her friends telling me that my mom was in trouble outside, and they were going to try to get the police to let her go so that she could take me to the hospital. They wrapped me up in a blanket and took me outside under the lights of a helicopter. There were a few helicopters, and my babysitters were asking for my mom, but the Clarksville Police Department wasn't interested in letting her go. Apparently she was caught getting higher drunk with that 14-year-old I'd mentioned before, and she was in a high-speed chase back to her apartment complex because she didn't have a phone at the house to let the babysitters know that she was going to jail. All right, at some point, I believe I was in a nursery in a facility that would later be bombed in the Oklahoma City bombing or something. I was there for some kind of strange testing. I remember liking the facility, or it being a place for learning. I thought that I was going to be there longer, and I was really glad that I was in a place where I was going to be able to learn, but that's not something that people actually wanted me to do, so they didn't keep me in places like that. I remember visiting the building, visiting with glass windows that was like triangular shaped glass windows. I can't remember, but just glass windows all over the whole building, and I'm not sure that it isn't the Langley building in Virginia that I can't remember walking into whenever I was a little kid. I watched Sesame Street with my mom, and she would try to teach me the names of the characters when I was young. I was younger than Shirley Temple, who I was watching on screen when I was introduced to her. We had a small black and white TV in the ghetto, so I watched Shirley Temple, Betty Boop, and everything else in black and white. My dad had an Atari. My brother and I tried to get in on that, and we were irritating. My dad let us hang out and be interested in the computer because his newfound technology became his new obsession, and he was less interested in any other aspect of life. My parents began to fight. One day, my father was said to be hiding out in the bushes of the trees with his firearm, watching my mom party with the neighbors. They would start having marital issues. He broke into the apartment and wrote "I still love you" in lipstick on the wall or something crazy like that. My dad and other men in the ghetto acted like they were mentally unsound. School was terrifying to me. I was told that I would be able to go to school where everyone would be excited about learning. The first time I set eyes on it, it was gray with bars on the walls. It was an old prison or jail that was converted into an elementary school. The teachers were late every morning, and the kids and I would have to gather and sit along the walls as we waited for our teachers for sometimes hours. We were instructed to stay quiet, so that we didn't tip off the rest of the school to the fact that our teacher didn't show up. We would miss breakfast in the mornings. I had an attention problem. It was difficult for me to focus. I would lose my focus quite a bit, and it was very frustrating to me. I would run to the bus stop every morning. In the beginning, it was fun. My mom took time to get me up and ready. She was somewhat patient and encouraging. She would encourage me to brush my teeth, and I had time for all that. And eventually, she would start waking me up late and just throwing me out on the porch while I was still asleep. She told me to walk to the bus stop. I would barely be able to open my eyes, and I would be worried that my breath was nasty or I hadn't changed my clothes from the day before, and I would just have to push myself to the bus stop anyways. And being on the bus was hell to me, and going to school was hell. And all I wanted to do was just go back to sleep. And it was a battle to stay awake, which was very embarrassing to me. And all the children on the bus made fun of me every day because of my attention problem. And they would have to shake me to wake me up, even though I was already awake. And this was the only way that I would make it off the bus. And it was really difficult for me to determine which bus was mine and which bus stop was mine, because they made so many stops and I couldn't pay attention to any of it. And I don't mean to cry. I think that crying on YouTube is manipulative. The lunch ladies were often mean in school. All the teachers were always really mean. I met a little girl who was also named LaDonna. She was covered in scars. She was a little black girl, and she couldn't talk very much, and her scars were huge. I couldn't get her to talk to me ever. We brought towels to school, and we were expected to take naps on them during the day. I loved taking naps, but they were never long enough. I had family out in or around Louisville, Kentucky, or I thought I did. My mom's cousin, or I thought she was my mom, he was Larry Elmore. He was an artist for Dungeons and Dragons. He may still be around. His mom was my great-grandmother's sister. I would visit our Kentucky family on occasion. My great-grandmother made the first piece of cherry pie I ever ate, and my parents mysteriously dropped me off in her yard sometimes alone in the morning. This was something they began to make a habit of until my great-grandma scolded them, telling them to stop doing that. There was a playhouse in her backyard. It had a little table in it, windows, a small kitchen. My cousin had the luxury of these things, this yard, and their connection to one another, my cousins or whoever, those kids. Someone out there lived in a house where one room was a big hole anyone could have fallen into that was really weird. They had goats and little baby animals I can remember feeding with bottles. The environment and family... The environment and family was available for me to learn, grow, and love, and to be accepted. But that wasn't anyone's plan for my life, and so I wasn't really allowed to connect with that family in Kentucky. I walked, which may have just been my mom's family that I'm not, or whoever the motherly unit is that Melinda's family, I may not even be related to. I don't even know anymore. I walked into a building once that was covered in crystals, crystal beaded curtains, and other beautiful things. People could barely pull me out. I'm just telling you guys like weird memories that I have of babyhood, childhood. About birth to 5. I probably should have said that to begin with. I probably should have given you guys a graphics warning, but I'm just trying to hurry up here since I'm not allowed to live a real life. Some big toys I almost forgot about. My brother got an automated Mickey Mouse doll, and I got a dollhouse from my mom. She said she'd hidden it and worked on it in secret, but she unveiled it to me, and within minutes my baby brother walked over and sat on it, destroying it. She seemed to have let him. She abused him for breaking the house, even though she seemed to have set that up. She promised that she would put it back together for me and give it back to me soon, but I never saw it again. I never even got to look over it the first time. I remember my bedroom in several different stages. At one point, it was unveiled to me. My entire room was decorated in clowns, and my bed was the only bed in there. I sat in that, and it all felt great. My mom spent that kind of time on my room. But eventually I told her I didn't like clowns, and she was devastated by that. Even though I loved the room, I would have been just fine with the room, even though I had clowns. You know what I mean? Because it was beautiful. But all I had to say was that I didn't like clowns, and she fucking lost it, dude. She acted really upset that I didn't like the clowns or thought that they were scary. She used to sing songs and read books to me. She was really lonely and compassionate. Sometimes she was nuts. Other times she was weird, neglectful, mean, abusive, but sometimes she was just so loving. Back and forth like a mental patient was the mind my mother had. She was abusing the children she loved, whether she wanted to or planned to or not. Something weird went on there. There was a huge rock in front of Peters Mill Road apartments where I sat sometimes. We had these slap bracelets I played with sitting on the rocks. The kids used to say dead meat all the time. I don't know if that was from a movie or not. My mom spoke to me about death and about suicide, explaining that a person can kill themselves. And I was very miserable and emotional child, or I became a very miserable and emotional toddler. I can remember being a toddler and a young child sitting on that big rock contemplating suicide, and that I would spend hours alone staring out into space, and that would become a theme throughout my life. And I was always dreaming of escape or some alternate world that I could live in, and I would go lay out in the road hoping that someone would see me. I used to go lay out in the road hoping that someone would run me over whenever I was ready to commit suicide as a little kid. So I would go lay out, you know what I mean? And I would just lay there, and the cars would drive up, and I would just I would hope that they wouldn't see me and they'd just run me over. But they would see me and they'd be like honking. They'd be like, get out of the road. Time after time, no one would run me over. They would yell at me to get out of the way, and sometimes I felt like I couldn't move. I would just lay there until they walked over me to see if I was alive or if I was okay, and then they would make me move. Some of them started getting confused and irritated after a while. Oh, it's her again in the road. After my mom spent time in jail for outrunning the Clarksville Police Department in their choppers, my mom sat with me and explained that my grandparents were coming to get me. She said the police were going to take her to jail for a very long time, and that I had to go live with my grandparents now. I would go live with my grandparents for years in Texas while my mom spent only 11 days in jail. As we left the complex, my heart broke desperately for my mother, my home, and for my miserable life I was leaving. My little brother began to cry as I cried for my mom, and I lay back and began to kick my little brother as hard as I could. For the first time ever, I hit him, bludgeoned him, busted him up, and I hurt my baby brother worse than I'd ever hurt him or anyone in my life, or potentially even worse than I'd ever been hurt, either one of us. I'd never hurt my brother like that before. I was actually if I saw my brother get a swat on the butt, I would start bawling. My mom could not get onto my brother at all because I would start bawling my eyes out. And here all of a sudden I just changed, just completely flipped. They couldn't really discipline Sean because of how I reacted to it. When we were taken away like that, I lost it. I couldn't stop abusing my baby brother until I was an adult. I was playing in a sandbox, and the little boy, and I was playing with a sandbox and a little boy, and he deliberately threw sand in my eyes, and I was stuck like that for a while, and that's how I learned about getting sand in your eyes. I learned what it was like to deal with kids being really mean while I was there in that apartment complex. At some point, the kids' room was cool with 2 beds and theater lighting along the floor. That one of the phases that the bedroom was in. My mom would practice locking us behind the door. She removed the handle so we couldn't get out. She would leave us in there for long periods of time. Sometimes she would throw the cat in with us, and the cat would go crazy and hurt us really bad. Then my mom started waking up my baby brother and I from a dead sleep, locking us outside on the porch. We would yell and scream and cry, and her friends would come over, and they were doing something in there, and so she would lock us out on the porch while we were still asleep. My grandparents would bring that up later, saying they heard that the neighbors said that my mom was just locking us out on the porch like that. We would just wake up and be stuck outside. It was way worse than being left alone. Especially because we were screaming and crying and stuff outside and no one paid any attention to us. I mean, not loud enough anyways. In the beginning, my mom had 2 dancing shoes for my baby brother, or she had dancing shoes for my baby brother, tap dancing shoes, and ballet shoes for me. She told me I was going to become a famous ballerina after the woman I was named after, who was an Italian named LaDonna or something. She had little plans for the kids. Oh, wait. I can't believe how bad the first 5 years of my life was, and no one really paid any attention to that. I feel like I still feel some of the pain I had as a baby, toddler, and young child. I feel crushed beneath the weight of that pain if I really think about it, but I don't let I don't let the darkness really take me like that. But I do still feel it. We had a light bright and a glowworm. We used to take mason jars outside and hunt for fireflies. No matter what the activity was, the children around me always acted like I wasn't paying enough attention. They were always like all the time, hey, jolting me out of any focus, anything that I was concentrating on. Even if I wasn't zoning out, people began to abuse this idea that I was just like this person thing that stared out into space and that they had to jolt me back into their idea of reality or whatever. So I had all these kids, everybody around me, whole buses, whole schools, everybody doing this to me, which was this prompting shit that my mother basically started whenever I was a kid. And that would carry over into everything. I would go to Amarillo with my grandparents. It took us a couple days to get back there. They made it clear that they weren't okay with me abusing and murdering my baby brother. I would even cry for my mom and wonder every night, calling and crying out for her for years while my family lied to me, telling me she was still in jail. She was just getting pounded out somewhere. I would stay with my grandparents until my molester dad was released for Christmas one year, and I made a big deal. I would stay with my grandparents until my molester dad was released from Christmas one year, which I made a big deal about. But I wasn't a newborn baby or a toddler anymore, so he wasn't interested in me anymore, and it was difficult for him to speak to me or look at me for the rest of my life. And that's almost as much as I can remember about my life from birth to 5. Okay, but I wanted to add in this that I actually had some of this written in another spot, and I was going back and adjusting it. I guess I didn't put it all on here, but I accidentally missed a spot about how at one point my parents had their own bedroom, and I had a bed in the corner of the room. It almost seems like part of what I wrote was deleted, but I had this little makeshift bed thing in the corner of the room, which was a place that was supposed to be like for me and my dad to spend time together. And I remember him actually being in that space with me, and that he would do this thing where he would talk really dirty to me, and it would just be this real dirty talk, and it was him like trying to get me to be sexual. It seemed like my parents both worked at this, kind of like trying to coax me to be sexual, to have like a sexual mentality or to be sexual, but I can't actually remember them doing those like things to me. I can't remember them putting hands anywhere or asking me to do things to them. I just know that they made me really sexual whenever I was very, very little, and that they were asking me to act out, and then if I acted out at the wrong time or in front of the wrong people, that I would be punished for it. And then later on, or it could have been happening then, but I would begin to catch my parents up at about the age of 7 while my dad was married to my stepmother, who was also engaging in this behavior. I would catch them up recording me while I was asleep, while I was like missing, clothing and things like that. I knew that they what I'd begun to realize was that they were drugging my food somehow and then recording me afterwards while I was asleep, which could have been going on ever since I was very young. Another part that I left out of this video is the toddler catwalk that my parents, because these are things that I've explained in other videos. Actually, I've got other whole videos about this. My parents did have me do catwalks whenever I was a toddler. They had me dress up in weird stuff. They were taking lots of pictures and videos of me. They told me that wealthy men were going to buy these photos and I was so beautiful, and my parents acted like they were just so in love with me and so obsessed with me and that I was just so great, and they never treated me ever again as well as they did whenever I was like 2 or 3 years old and they were taking pictures of me and having me do the little catwalk thing. I explain in my videos that that they promised me that they would buy me sparkly clothes if I would look really happy for the pictures and do a really good job and stuff like that, and that the sparkly clothes never came. So I'll just say right here that whether you're actually doing something to a child or not, if you're showing them images, if you're teaching them to be sexual, if you're completely changing their entire lives and their entire biology and everything by teaching them to be sexual far earlier on than they're supposed to, if you're molesting them in their sleep, if you're filming them, if you're exploiting them, if you're teaching them to be sexual and taking pictures of that and selling it, still sexual exploitation, that's still child molestation. As far as I'm concerned, all of my parents need to be locked up for this. I haven't, that's some of the main memories that I can remember from birth to 5 anyways. I don't make it to a point which happens later on in explaining the first time that my stepmother tried to take me out. There's a lot of people and a lot of things that I haven't really been able to mention in the time frame that I have wanted to. I knew that I was going to live through all this anyways because I had an encounter when I was 14 years old and was given instructions as to how to spend money and do things later on in the future, a future that I haven't made it to yet. So I know that I make it, but what condition I'm going to be in by the time I get there, that's something I'm not entirely sure about. Today I'm walking with a limp over a car accident people got me into like a week ago or whatever, in part because they didn't want me to make this video. So apparently there's something in this video or information here which hopefully will help my situation and help free slaves and other things of that nature. And that's basically all I can tell you right now. I have to check out of this hotel room in 20 or 30 minutes and then I'll be, all right. Thanks for listening.